Well, it is indeed my pleasure to join you this morning. And you may already be able to tell my voice is not all that it usually is. About a week ago, I got a cold, and I was speaking in Dallas last Monday and Tuesday at a Christian school convention. And after I spoke on Monday, my voice went into the dungeon. And then when I spoke again on Tuesday, it went a little bit further into the dungeon. And it's been improving little bit every day. So even when I woke up this morning, praying and talking with the Lord and saying, Lord, I just know that today in my weakness, your strength must be perfected. And then I was on the treadmill briefly this morning, and it's not one of those where if you put stuff on little pockets, my glasses just start bouncing and it makes all kinds of racket. It was really annoying. So I safely just dropped them over there on the floor and continued my workout. And I stepped off the treadmill and heard crunch. I just had to laugh. I just thought, okay, my weakness has just been magnified for this morning. So I'm going to be apparently amazingly strong today, and I'm in for a treat, so I'm assuming you are too. I don't know what God's got going on here, but I walked into this morning, and I had my glasses all, pieces and so forth, and I handed it to Dave backstage, pastor, and I said, is there any way you could find somebody that could, and here they are. So I can see my screen just fine now. Well, I'm going to ask, for many of you, probably most of you in this room, you really haven't had any contact with biology since high school. Raise your hand. Yeah. You're the ones I'm talking to today. I want all of you to be able to get a finer grasp of just how awesome and intelligent and imaginative our Creator is. It's one of the things I love about having studied biology all of my life. My mother apparently knew I was going to be some kind of scientist because she said I never stopped asking questions. But I always loved to go to the zoo. Grew up in Chicago, so Lincoln Park, Brookfield Zoo. I just love looking at God's creatures. And that it still fascinates me today. And there's no end to the glory and the wonder that I feel when I'm in this world of biology. And with that, I just want to emphasize that in order to really cement in your mind who our Creator is, listening and watching these 5 presentations, all of which have been excellent. Paul Nelson's a longtime friend of mine, and I was watching backstage, and I'm looking forward to John's talk tonight. I heard Lee Strobel last night as well. But if you just avail yourself of this one-time exposure, you're going to be cheating yourself. And there are resources from many different authors out in the tables and so forth. Go by and look. Have a glance. Have a prayer time. Say, Lord, what is it here that you want me to really immerse myself in? Because this isn't just to have answers. That's not the whole point. A large part of it is to grow your sense of confidence in who our God is, and the amazing evidence there is for who He is and how He operates in this world. And it should blow your mind. It really should. And so I hope you'll make this a bit longer effort than just today, just this morning. Well, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today reflects back to a couple of verses from Romans. Romans is really Paul's theological defense of the gospel. And right after he says in verse 16 and 17, where he talks about, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to all that believe, the Jew and the Greek. What's he turn to next? He turns to creation. And he says that there are some people in the world already in first century who were suppressing the truth. Verse 18 of chapter 1, it says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So there's some truth out there that men are suppressing, men and women. And he explains a little further. He says, since what may be known about God is plain to them. Why? Because God has made it plain to them. So there's some truth about who God is that all men and women know. And why do they know this? Well, because it's plain. Why is it plain? God has apparently gone to great lengths to make it plain. What in the world is he talking about? Verse 20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. That's the truth, that even in first century, men and women were suppressing that truth. And it is a truth which if you review Paul's talk, I mean, they've been suppressing it even more directly for the last 150 years. And I'm going to share some things with you today that you're going to knock your brain a little bit and say, how come they don't get it? Why does it still seem so obscure to so many? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But I want to make some things plain. I want to help point out to you the things that are plain today. And for me, as a biologist, as a scientist, I'm just so excited that God let me live now. Because what we are discovering is making it far more plain than it has ever been. And I'm just really excited to be able to share that with all of you today. Now, I'm going to be talking about this thing called intelligent design, and how the design and the way things are made in biology, how does that point us towards God? Well, I want to take some time to define this for you today. Number one, what it's not. Intelligent design is not the latest version of creationism, okay? Why is that? All forms of creationism initially start with an interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11. From that interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11, they then move into the realm of science and try to coordinate their theological position with the scientific evidence available. Intelligent design does not do that. It does not rely on any particular interpretation of the scriptures. Where it starts is with the scientific evidence itself. So there's two aspects to intelligent design. Number one, it's an intellectual movement that challenges Darwinism and its dependence on random mutation and natural selection, purely natural process. In other words, it's saying that what we see in the biological realm could not be arrived at by just natural processes, undirected, unplanned, no purpose. The second part of it, though, is it's a scientific research program that here's where it gets kind of tricky. It's 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, so be careful. It's a scientific research program that investigates the effects of intelligent causes. And what are those intelligent causes? Well, we know them because they are effects of high specificity coupled with extremely small probabilities. What am I talking about? Okay. Well, when you talk about high specificity, we're talking about something that has a purpose, has some meaning to it. It's not just a random assortment of stuff. It seems to be put together in a way to accomplish a very clear purpose. And the probability is simply saying, if you just leave it to natural process, and we can actually calculate some measure of probability, it's going to be a really, really small, tiny probability. What we see amongst our own human experience is that we recognize specificity intuitively. We recognize small probability intuitively. What we're trying to do in intelligent design is quantify that, so as we approach events and effects we see in nature, can we determine that these had to be intelligently designed? They cannot be the result of natural process. My favorite example is winning the lottery. I was in San Diego about 2 months ago, and I just asked the audience, what's the odds of winning the lottery in California? And somebody in the church said, oh, 1 chance in 23 million. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I'm going to use. Let's talk about this idea of winning the lottery. As I said, the odds of winning the lottery are about 1 chance in 23 million. And I think the usual starting jackpot is what, about $3 or $4 million, and if somebody doesn't win it that week, they up the amount, and then they sell more tickets, and somebody eventually wins the lottery, right? You produce your ticket, they verify it, and you walk away with the money. Well, there's something you need to explain here. Somebody always eventually wins the lottery because of this strange phrase I've got up there, probabilistic resources. The laws of probability will tell you that we know somebody will win the lottery if we sell at least 10 to 11 million tickets. Because you've basically now reduced the odds down to about 1 chance in 2 that somebody's going to win. So somebody will always win just as long as you sell enough tickets, okay? So we can see that improbable events do happen all the time. Somebody eventually wins the lottery. But let's drastically lower the probability and dramatically raise the specificity of our simple case here. Let's just say that you have a neighbor who's been playing the lottery since it started, every week, just buying 1 ticket. I mean, really, if you're a Christian and a Calvinist, then all you need 1 ticket, right? If God has meant for you to win, 1 ticket's going to do it. But never won, just enjoys the process, loves looking in the paper or watching the news. What's the number? Did I win? You know, and it kind of gets some enjoyment out of it, but never wins. Well, one day, your neighbor finally wins the lottery. They win $4 million, and you actually get a little excited because maybe he'll repair that fence between our property, and I've been a good neighbor. Maybe I'll just find $1,000 on my doorstep, you know. But, you know, he produces the ticket. The lottery commission doesn't get too excited. I mean, yeah, he's your neighbor, but he just happened to be somebody who won the lottery. But let's go further. So this is no big deal to the lottery commission, right? He produces a ticket, verified, he gets the money. But let's say your neighbor wins the lottery, not this week, but the next week and the week later. And then you find out he used the exact same set of 6 numbers each time he won. What are you thinking? You're not believing this is by chance, are you? What's happened here? Well, you're thinking somebody cheated. What you're actually suspecting is intelligent design. Somebody has intelligently manipulated the system to ensure that this one person wins 3 weeks in a row. The specificity is same person, 3 weeks in a row. Probability? Oh, wait till you see this. What are the odds? 1 in 23 million times 1 in 23 million times 1 in 23 million. Multiply that out, what do you get? 1 chance in 12 sextillion that could happen by chance alone. The lottery commission will investigate. They assume intelligent design. I just gave you a probability. It's, quote, possible. But there haven't been enough people in the history of humanity to sell enough tickets to make it probable. They know somebody cheated. Those are the kinds of events we're looking for in nature. Those that are so specific and yet so improbable that, oh, okay, there might be a number we can attach to it. But we know that the universe does not have the probabilistic resources to do this by chance. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for in intelligent design. One more graphic description here. Two different heads. Okay. You got Mount Rushmore there on your left and the old man in the mountain from New Hampshire on your right. You intuitively know that Mount Rushmore is designed. There are so many clues available to you. First of all, they're bright and shiny white. They're not worn dark like the rest of the rock around it. That's recent. Didn't take a long time. Those profiles fit exactly the image in your mind of those four presidents: Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Lincoln. So there's your specificity, right? Now, I'm sure we could calculate a probability that nature could do that by itself. We could come up with a number, but nobody's going to believe it. You know that's intelligently designed. On the other hand, the old man in the mountain, well, you got to look at him from just the right angle with the light behind it, and all you can make out is a profile. If you were to look at that head on, you would not see a face. You could not tell. So the man in the mountain, that's by natural process. And we have no trouble distinguishing the two. And by the way, the old man in the mountain, he fell off in 2003. They had tried to intelligently design him to be preserved, but it didn't work. So in the natural world, those things fall apart eventually. Rushmore is going to be there a while. Now, let's turn to our main topic here. Now that you have a good idea about intelligent design, the kinds of things we're looking for. And remember I mentioned this idea of suppressing the truth. Well, I've got a couple of quotes from a couple of leading biologists, also atheists. First one is Richard Dawkins, who's well known from England and was the former professor at Oxford University of the lay communication of science, basically. And in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, the watch, okay, life looks like it's designed. That's basically what he says. Look at page 1. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Give the appearance. In other words, what he's admitting to is that living things look designed. Then he spends the remaining 300 pages of his book, The Blind Watchmaker. No, they're not designed, and here's how I think it happened. But it's important that he admits things look designed. The second quote from just a couple years later is from Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, won the Nobel Prize. Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. It's kind of like we're sitting here looking at the microscope, and we're just, not designed, not designed, not designed. This sounds like suppressing the truth to me. And they will often recognize it. Well, I'm going to talk about briefly this concept of irreducible complexity, which is another way of talking about intelligent design. Mike Behe introduced this idea when his book Darwin's Black Box came out in 1996. Excuse me. He said something is irreducibly complex if it's composed of two or more necessary parts, remove one part, and function is not just impaired, but destroyed. His favorite example has been that of a mousetrap. He says a mousetrap is irreducibly complex. Now, I've got my handy-dandy little mousetrap up here with me. These things cost about $1, you know. And that there are 5 parts to a mousetrap. You have to have the wooden base, okay? And then you have the 4 metal parts. You've got the holding bar, and you've got the clamp, and you've got the catch, and you've got the spring, or the hammer, I should say. Now, if you took one of these parts away, if you say you took the holding bar away, you could not set the trap, and you catch no mice. You don't catch fewer mice, you catch no mice. If you take the spring away, well then there's no force to the hammer, and you don't catch fewer mice, you catch no mice. So all 5 parts of the mousetrap have to be there at one time in order for the mousetrap to work. So the idea is that natural selection cannot build a mousetrap. Natural selection works by slow, gradual increments, adds one small piece or refines a piece, one thing at a time. But you can't catch any mice until all 5 are here. And all 5 are actually coordinated with each other. They're not just randomly distributed. I could put these 5 parts into a paper bag and shake them up, and you're never going to get a mousetrap out of that. Even assembling them, even if you've got the parts, requires some sort of plan or purpose. I just broke my stirrer. So again, those are the kinds of things we're looking for in living organisms. Do we have such irreducibly complex machines? Well, indeed we do. The bacterial flagellum is kind of the poster child of intelligent design in biology. It's irreducibly complex and could not have evolved by natural selection. Essentially, the bacterial flagellum is a rotary motor, similar to the kind you use on the back of a fishing boat. And it operates very much the same way. It's been referred to by some scientists as the most efficient machine in the universe. It's a rotary motor. It's got a propeller, a universal joint, a stator, a rotor. It's got all the parts of a rotary motor of a human-designed rotary motor. It's almost an exact one-to-one correspondence. There are over 40 parts. Take any one of those parts away, and either the flagellum is not made, or it simply doesn't function. It's irreducibly complex by Behe's definition. Now, this would seem like an almost overwhelming example. 40 parts, 40 different proteins, all highly coordinated to each other. And if, I don't have it today, but you can go online, bacterial flagellum, and you can find videos that computer graphics show you how it's assembled. It's just amazing to watch. But there have been critics, okay? There is something called the bacterial type 3 secretory system, or T3SS. It's a system with 10 different proteins that are homologous to bacterial flagellar proteins. Now, what homologous means is that the scientists are saying these are directly related to. They're almost the same protein, they would say. They're cousins, if you will. All right? And they suggest that the flagellum could have started out as a T3SS that just exports proteins, add a filament, there are filaments in the cell, added a motor protein, there are other motor proteins in the cell, and voila, you've got a flagellum. Kenneth Miller from University of Rhode Island has made a living out of trying to deconstruct, if you will, the flagellum. But it's still spinning. First of all, it's most likely that this type 3 secretory system actually is a remnant of the bacterial flagellum. And why is that? What we're able to see is that you find the flagella throughout all bacterial lineages. It's everywhere. And so they're assuming that even in an evolutionary context, it goes back to the very beginning of bacteria. But we only find the type T3SS spottily here and there in pathogenic bacteria of both plants and animals. Pathogenic means they're poisonous. they use that T3SS to export toxins into your system. Also, they never seem to address the other 30 completely unique proteins in the flagellar system. And even if each of these proteins existed in a different form doing something else, one of the things they never talk about is that, for the most part, proteins exist individually, and they're constructed in such a way that they're very happy in water. But when you try to bring two proteins together, they will repel each other. In order to form a flagellar motor, you've got to get 40 proteins that stick together and like being close to each other. This is often never talked about. Just because you can find 40 proteins that you could maybe assemble into these different forms, putting them all together into one big complex is another matter altogether. Proteins don't like to be close to other proteins as a general rule. I love this quote. This is very recent from Aizawa. Since the flagellum is so well designed and beautifully constructed by an ordered assembly pathway, even I, who am not a creationist, get an awe-inspiring feeling from its divine beauty. The design just shouts at you. And he may still maintain this is evolved, but an explanation is definitely eluding me. Now let's go back to this idea of complex and specific again. In front of you there on the photo are two different assemblies of rocks. The one in the background is extremely complex. There's thousands upon thousands of rocks there, but they're in an arrangement. That specific arrangement, highly improbable, but it doesn't mean anything. It's not needed for anything. There's no purpose to that assemblage of rocks. It's just a bunch of rocks, right? Now you look at the bunch of rocks in the foreground. Now that's not quite so complex. Maybe only 30 or 40 rocks here. And they're arranged in what looks like a circle. Yeah, there's some specificity to that. And we might be able to arrive at some natural process that could put those rocks in a circle, maybe. But it would be an interesting conversation for a geologist. Okay? But let's say you walk a little bit further down this black sand beach and you see this. Is that the result of wind, rain, waves, sun? No. Again, you intuitively recognize that that comes from an intelligence. Why? You have very specific shapes, John, Loves, Mary. Those shapes are arranged in a sequence. And then they're grouped together, and those groups of symbols are themselves arranged in a sequence to do what? To communicate a message, information. You know that that was intelligently designed. Do you know who wrote the message? Do you know if it's true? No? Not unless you know John or Mary, and even then you might not know it's true. But what you do know is that message was intelligently designed. And that's what we see in biology. We see the evidence of design, but that scientific evidence alone does not identify the designer for you. That's why intelligent design is not a religious idea. If you want to identify the designer, then you need to take your scientific evidence and bring in your philosophical and theological foundations to address that larger question. But the scientific evidence alone only tells you this is designed. Where or how it came about to be that way, evidence doesn't tell us. Now, we're talking now about the origin of biological information. And excuse me, when we talk about language, we use letters to make words. We use words to make sentences. We use sentences to write a book. And we use books to make up a library. Well, we have a direct correspondence to the genetic code, to our DNA language. Instead of letters, we have things called nucleotides. There's 4 of them. We'll just abbreviate GCAT. Okay? Combinations of those nucleotides are what form words. They're 3-letter codons. You have 4 possible letters, 3-letter words. There are 64 possible combinations. And each of those 64 combinations codes for a specific amino acid, and there's 20 of those. So some of the amino acids have more than one codon that codes for them. Well, you arrange the codons together, which arranges the sequence of the amino acids, and what do you get? Well, you get sentences, or you get genes. Genes are what code for proteins. Proteins are sequences of amino acids. The proteins get their function from the sequence of amino acids, which is coded for in the DNA. What we're seeing is that the genetic code indeed is a language. It's coded information. You put genes and proteins together, and that's what chromosomes are. You build your library of chromosomes, and that's what the genome is. And we're finding out that the genome is far more organized than any library, even the Library of Congress. There are things in the genome we've only been discovering in the last 10 years that are just astounding. Genetic code, kind of what they call the central dogma here. DNA is transcribed into RNA. Notice the language term. RNA is then translated into protein. Again, a language term. Dozens of transcription factors regulate transcription. The 3D arrangement of the chromosomes orders what genes are read, what genes are used, and it's tissue specific. So the chromosomes in the nucleus of all of your different kinds of cells get arranged in 3-dimensional space differently to make use of the different proteins, the different genes. There are all kinds of things called promoters, enhancers, and repressors, and all other kinds of stuff. All of which necessary to express the genes accurately and on time. And none of it seems to be junk. Just these last couple of months, in September, the ENCODE project published a series of papers, and the basic take-home conclusion, 80% of the genome has a biochemical function. 80% of it is being used. They used to say, okay, since only about 2% of our genome actually codes for protein, the other 98% must be useless. And it's just kind of what they call selfish DNA, copying itself over and over and over again. That's what DNA does. And so our genome was just filled with these leftovers of evolution. Well, the ENCODE project publishes its results, and it's like, 80% of this genome is being used. And it was fun, actually, to watch the reaction of many evolutionists, because some would say, oh, we knew most of it was being used all along. And others on the other side would say, oh, no, it's still mostly junk. These guys don't understand biology. Literally. That's what some bloggers were saying, although they're completely misinterpreting the evidence. Well, they did the work. Give these guys a chance. Now, one of the books that come out just the last 2 years called Signature in the Cell. And there's a nice animated video here from the website that will show you, by computer graphics, some of these processes. It'll show you transcription, it'll show you translation, and you'll get to see some of the actual molecular machines that do this work.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, a messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a two-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of the amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
You know, for a guy growing up who all I could see was two-dimensional drawings on a page, trying to understand that stuff as a graduate student, this is so much better. So much better. In the book, Steve Myers says, it eventually became clear to me that intelligent design stood as the only known cause of specified information-rich systems, and therefore that ID provides the best, most causally adequate explanation for the origin of the information necessary to produce the first life. Excuse me. Right after the sequence for the human genome was announced, there was an article about it in the San Francisco Chronicle, and a guy named Gene Meyer was interviewed, who was part of the team. And he said, we're deliciously complex at the molecular level. We don't understand ourselves yet, which is cool. There's still a metaphysical, magical element. The system is extremely complex. It's like it was designed. Here, that looks like it again. There's a huge intelligence there. I don't see that as being unscientific. Others may, but not me. One last thing here. I have to get some critters in here somewhere, okay? And I do get the impression that at the later service I can cheat a little bit. Yeah? Okay. I just got a yeah from the audience, so I'm good. Woodpeckers are some of my favorite birds. This is the pileated woodpecker on the left and the green woodpecker from Europe on the right. Woodpeckers are pretty strange creatures. They bang their heads in the trees. That's what they do. And they do that to reach insects that are sometimes under the bark or in the wood of the tree. And they have a number of adaptations. A lot of them do that. The bill is very tough. It's not brittle. It won't break. It's not rubbery. It doesn't bend. Look at the green woodpecker there on the right, and you see its tail feathers are being used like the third leg of a tripod. Again, to give it stability as it bangs its head into trees. A whole array of muscles and nerve fibers to allow that rapid motion. We talk about a woodpecker drumming because it sounds like a drum roll. Did you ever try to do that as a human? Some of our younger adults have found out that gives you headaches. We don't have the capacity to do that. We're not designed for that kind of motion, but these clearly are. But one of the most amazing adaptations of woodpecker is the tongue. They want to drill a hole, and then they find little caverns or tunnels that the insects have drilled in the hole in the wood, and they stick their tongue in and search up and down the tunnels looking for insects. Did you hear what I said? They stick their tongues into the wood. Some woodpeckers can extend their tongues 3 to 5 times the length of the beak. Now that's amazing enough, but then you have to ask the question, okay, where do you put it when it comes back inside? Where's it go? Well, I'm going to show you. For most vertebrates, the tongue is a muscle. It attaches to the lower jaw. There's a little bone in there, and your tongue has a bone called the hyoid bone. Helps provide some level of stiffness. But that's not what the woodpecker tongue does. If we start here at the tip of the tongue, the woodpecker tongue does not attach to the lower jaw. It exits into the throat, back to the back of the throat, up between the skin and the skull, over the top of the head, comes down between the eyes, inserts into the right nostril, and extends all the way to the tip of the upper bill of the beak. When it wants to stick its tongue out, this attachment here loosens and it reattaches to the center of between the eyes. And actually these loops here, they extend as big loops, and these loops tighten down, and out comes the tongue 2, 3, 4, 5 times the length of the beak. The question you have to ask yourself is, how does that evolve? Because you have to do 2 things simultaneously. You have to get a longer tongue and a retraction mechanism at the same time. Because if you just get a mutation that gives you a slightly longer tongue, the first time you go to drill a hole, you cut it off. That's not selectively advantageous. Okay? So mostly intelligent design is focusing on molecular machines because they're easier to get at, easier to calculate probabilities, but we're beginning to see now that even in creatures, the largest adaptations are just as irreducibly complex. Well, I'm going to read you one last quote. I'm going to skip through this here. I see people waiting. This comes from an evolutionary biologist from Harvard. And he wrote a review of Carl Sagan's final book, A Demon-Haunted World. And at the very end of the review, he says, very openly, excuse me, we take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories. Why? Because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. But on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Paul just talked about this in the last session. That's the real barrier. That's why these kinds of debates get so heated. It's not just about the science. You're underpinning the basic foundations of a materialistic, atheistic worldview. And if that's not true, if our creation story doesn't work, then I'm somehow responsible to something or someone outside myself. And we cannot allow that divine foot in the door. We're making real progress. The data is really coming our way. And I hope you'll stay tuned. Excuse me, as Paul mentioned, if you follow this URL, intelligentdesign.org/saddleback, we got a special offer just for you. 4 ebooks can be downloaded in chapters, and we hope to take advantage of that. Stop by the Discovery Institute booth. And Pro Ministries has its Intelligent Design DVD small group curriculum available outside, and I'll be out there later on as well. Let me pray for us. Gracious Father, I thank you that in my weakness, your strength is still there. Father, and I do pray that anyone here who does not know you will have had an opportunity to get a closer glimpse as to who you are, your power, your incredible intelligence, your imagination, sometimes just having fun. Right when we think we've got you figured out, you make a woodpecker. And we just, wow. Lord, I pray, Father, that someone here would want to know you today. There's plenty of people around here who that question can be asked about, and I pray that they would not hesitate, not be shy. I pray all this in Jesus' name, amen.